Hello and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted to have two guests with us today, so two for the price of one. It's great to have Léonie Watson and Patrick Lauke from the Paciello Group with us. We're going to be talking about inclusive design, particularly Inclusive Design 24, which is something that is going to be running in the next few weeks, and we're very pleased to be taking part in it. And there's a range of topics, all of which are close to our hearts. But first of all, please, take the time to introduce yourselves. Tell us a bit about yourselves. Although I know you and know you by reputation, it would be good for our audience to know a bit more about you. Léonie, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Léonie Watson. I'm Director of Developer Communications and an engineer at the Paciello Group. And I'm one of the organizing team that puts together Inclusive Design 24, known as ID24, which is happening on the 16th of November.
Thank you.
Cool. And hello, I'm Patrick Lauke. I'm a senior engineer also at the Paciello Group at TPG. And I've been involved with all sorts of accessibility related things probably since the early 2001 time. I always pop up on lists, etc. And yeah, I'm also helping co-organize ID24. And yeah, we're looking forward to it.
So this is definitely not the first time you've done ID24. I remember a few years back, Carl the Viking going around and organizing it, but it is something that is quite special in that it's 24 hours worth of accessibility goodness, all from people all around the globe talking about different topics. It's an opportunity to bring experts and leading lights of their areas together, and you also put the stuff up there and leave it up, so there's a wealth of information for people to come back to. I'm assuming you're not expecting everyone to 4 hours with a
No.
extremely strong coffees. No, great. So
I was just saying,
so you've got some really
the idea actually goes back a little bit further to my first CSUN,
Yes.
actually back in 2010. And I came away with this amazing sense of the community and meeting people and exchanging ideas. And it occurred to me that, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to CSUN, and that wasn't an opportunity that everybody was either, able to take up or even afford. And I had this idea about a 24-hour online conference that would enable anyone from anywhere in the world just to dial in and be part of it. And lots of us ended up talking about it that year at CSUN, but nothing ever came of it until Carl, had a similar idea in 2013. Mike Paciello backed it. Patrick, myself, Henny Swan, Ian Pouncey, Steve Faulkner, a number of the other TPG crew kind of piled in on the idea, and that's what brought us to the first ID24 back in 2013.
Yeah, not forgetting Billy Gregory as well, obviously. Yeah.
Of course, yes. How could we? Mr. Lumberjack.
He worked tirelessly as well.
Yeah, we can never forget him. Yeah, never forget Billy.
But this year you've got some support from our friends at our mutual friends at Barclays. So they're piling in, and you've also from what I can see been working on, they've been promoting the inclusive design principles as well. Can you tell us a bit more about that work?
Sure. The inclusive design principles were an idea that came about through discussions across a number of the TPG team. Obviously, we work a lot with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and like most people who are very familiar with them, we recognize that they're very focused on technical conformance and not so much on the usability and inclusion or inclusive design side of things. So we started working on a set of inclusive design principles that we published earlier this year. They're at inclusivedesignprinciples.org, and we now have them in a few different languages: Japanese, Spanish, French. I think we've got Polish on the way. So we're looking to build up that. And then Barclays got in touch with us to say that this was very much where their current thinking was in terms of accessibility. They've got a very talented and capable accessibility team, and they were so kind of interested and enthusiastic about this idea of these inclusive design principles that they got together and published a series of posters that embody and symbolize the principles. And Patrick, you can probably say more about what's in the posters than I can.
Oh, I have to admit, I've not looked at them in a while, but I do remember at the time looking at them. They were very good and comprehensive. Probably talking around this a little bit, it is probably the idea of these inclusive design principles really kind of dovetails with some of the ideas of the talks that we have at the Inclusive Design 24 event, which is really about not being so focused purely on compliance. You know, we're going to follow the strict word of WCAG, but really kind of taking that only as an initial approach, because you know, true accessibility, which kind of goes together with usability for people with disabilities. That is really kind of an interesting area, and an area that more and more we're trying to move towards, and certainly the inclusive design principles focus more on that aspect versus, you know, pure, you know, the letter of WCAG is this type compliance. So we're hoping, particularly with a lot of the talks at ID24, that we're going to really kind of go beyond pure accessibility and, you know, bring up interesting topics at the intersection between usability, accessibility, and everything else.
This is, Deborah, and welcome both of you to the program. We have been fans of your work for many, many years, and Mike Paciello has been a real gift to our industry and community. I really like the doing it as a principle, because with our community at AXSChat, so we have a couple of people that are not always very fans of the standards, and they push back. And then, of course, in the United States, we're very focused on compliance and litigation, and really beating people up over these issues. And unfortunately, I think that is causing us to not be as creative as we could, and when we're only looking at it from the compliance lens. And so I think it's a really good idea that you put together these principles, because it appears to me that way you don't get into the way of communication and technology and innovations if you look at it as a principle. And I'll just give you an example. I was in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia the other day, and they were asking me about the United Nations, the rights on the person, the conference on the CRPD. I can't speak. And they were saying, so do we have to follow it, word by word by word? And I said, well, you really want to look at it, and you want to look at the intent, the spirit of it, is what we often say in the United States, the spirit of the law, because it's really got to be looked at by culture and by the type of ICT. And there's so many variables that comes to making something accessible. So I have looked extensively at what you're recommending with the principles, and I think they're very sound. And I think that is how we can actually move accessibility forward in more innovative ways. And once again, I had a wonderful conversation the other day with August he's the director of Pinterest, and he is doing amazing work. And he said, and he's a designer, he designed Xbox, and he's a brilliant designer. But he said, I personally feel that when something is designed that is not accessible to people with disabilities, that the designer actually went out of their way to make sure it wasn't designed for us, which I thought was just an interesting perspective. And so creating these principles, I think, sort of pulls us all back to, what are we doing? How do we be innovative? How do we not get stuck in the laws and the language, and just really continue to create things that work for everybody? So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Deborah, and thank you for your really kind words about the principles. I think one of the interesting things we can say when we look back on WCAG and its history is that we took something that has guidelines in its title, and in a lot of jurisdictions we made them law, and I think that was always likely to set up a conflict right there. We had something that was intended to guide and be a framework, and instead we've tried to use it as something categorical and absolute. Right. And I think hopefully something like the inclusive design principles can sort of bridge that gap and kind of get back, as you say, to the more creative way of thinking about accessibility and finding solutions.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I'm going to turn it over to Antonio. I know he has a question.
Thank you, Deborah. No, I think it's. I'm looking to, when you were putting together the event. If you look back to the first and to the one that you are organizing today, do you think that the perspective that you have in relation to the audience of the event has changed?
Good question. Yes, I think we've got a lot more experience of putting the events on, and we've got 2 or 3 years now worth of experience engaging with the audiences that have come together for each of the different ID24s. So yes, I think we are better informed. The first one we put together, I think, in about a month, and we begged, borrowed, stole, cajoled, and pleaded with everybody we knew, and people really came together to help us pull it off. It was a true community effort. We could not have done it without the enormous generosity of everybody involved. These days we're a lot more organized about it. We're still learning, but I think that's given us a different perspective, just the experience of putting the event together. And hopefully we're getting better at engaging with the audiences each time we do it as well.
Yeah, I would echo that, because I had to look back. I think the first one we did was actually 2014, so we've been going for quite a while. Sorry, I just realized. And yeah, I do remember the very first one. We were still unsure about who would actually attend this event, and we had some sessions on more of a project manager type target audience, and a few more on tech. And even with the tech, we weren't quite sure how deeply technical can or should we get. Whereas, yeah, I would agree that nowadays we have more of a focus on, and that combines with your role, Léonie, of developer communications. We have more of a focus now on the developer community, and we know the kinds of people who engage with the event. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey from the let's put on a show in the barn right here, right now, to, well, in some respects, we're still at that level, but yeah, it's certainly come a long way in terms of, we've made mistakes in terms of the tech and in terms of the organization, but, we've managed to remove most of those kinks now, and we're getting there. We're getting there. It's a good, successful event, at least from where I've been sitting and from the kind of feedback I've been getting from the developer community.
And I think you made a good, sorry, I was just saying, I think you made a good point, Patrick, about, to some extent, keeping that informality about it. One of the greatest things we've got is our sense of community in the accessibility profession. And I think ID24 tries to both tap into that and enable more people to share it. And certainly we've watched the global audience kind of grow over the past few years. I think when we ran ID24 earlier this year, we had tweets and comments and questions from people in every continent of the world, apart from the Arctics, I think, in, I forget the exact stats, but, cities from all over the world. And even some people who stuck it out for the whole 24 hours right there with us. So, hopefully we can keep on improving that too, and reaching out globally more to different people in different parts of the world through the 24 hours.
Because I think it's a very valuable resource, even after the event itself. Because I usually engage with a good number of startups in the places where I move, and I have an example of a friend who is building a startup focused on human resources. Referral, to refer people to hire others. And he was saying, no, where do I find references? Because I want to make my system, my app, my application, my system accessible. And sometimes he was talking with developers, and some of the developers were struggling to understand the term accessible. So it was because it's accessible, it's out there, it's available, and then he said, no, that's not what I mean. So he was looking for references, and the event that you are running provides a very good level of information for people who want to know more about accessibility and design, and it stays there. It's not something that disappears, like a conference you go and then it's gone. It's always there as a reference. So I think it's very useful for people who are trying to build applications and systems and want to discover more about what they can do, or who can they learn, who can they reach to learn more about it.
Thank you. And I think we try very hard as well to cover perhaps some unusual topics. We've talked about accessibility in smart cities, accessibility of comics. We've covered, design, mobile, gaming, both console and desktop. We've had some big companies, some individual freelancers, people talking about usability, design, as well as code development, all aspects of accessibility, which I think is perhaps a little more unusual in terms of accessibility conferences.
I'm very keen. The concept of accessibility beyond the web, and I know that's a view that is broadly aligned with where even W3C is going, in that they've dropped the web content bit of accessibility and are just looking at accessibility guidelines for the future. But you've got some really interesting topics, and things that we're interested in here at AXSChat too. So yes, absolutely, Internet of Things. We're going to be surrounded by devices over the next few years, if we're not already, and how they interoperate and how they communicate with us, and how we can find ways of making them accessible, I think is a huge topic, and I think that it's one that's possibly people are underestimating the complexity of the task in hand. So it'd be interesting to see what other people have to say about this, because I think it's something that perhaps is just starting to get onto people's radar.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see accessibility being thought of a lot earlier on with some of these technologies. Yes. You mentioned the W3C. They're doing a lot of work on web VR. There's a second workshop coming up in Brussels in December that they're hosting on that subject. And one of the key points for that workshop will be following up on the early accessibility conversations and inputs that were had at a workshop run last year. So I think it's great that we're starting to see that thinking coming in, really early on in the development of these things.
Yeah, I also think that how we're going to interact with stuff is going to change markedly. From effectively having a piece of hardware, be it a phone or a computer with a keyboard, to an invisible computer, because you're surrounded by information and all kinds of sort of invisible interfaces. So how we both control machines and computers and access data is going to change profoundly, and therefore how we think about accessibility is going to also change profoundly over the coming years. So there are particularly things like smart ink. You could essentially paint your whole house in smart ink and turn everything into a display, right, which would work for some people, or you could equally potentially turn everything into haptics, and you could if the ink is conductive, you could potentially make everything a haptic feedback device. So there's all of these new modalities of ways of communicating, and we'll be using our senses, I think, very differently in the future. And so, is this something that you're seeing in your work? Are people asking about this? Obviously, there are some people talking about it on the bill on ID24, but is this something that you see coming up quite a bit at the moment?
I'll be honest, in terms of our commercial work coming into TPG, you know, we're still seeing the majority of work coming in is the bread and butter, you know, accessibility audits, VPATs, or the we're about to get sued kind of market. So I'd love to say that we're getting a lot of these cutting edge, really interesting kind of projects that we're involved in. We are involved with a few things in terms of, for instance, gaming platforms and accessibility there. But yeah, it's not as much as we'd love to in terms of, you know, where the interest lies. But you never know. You know, we get some kiosk accessibility stuff, that sort of thing that pops up every now and again. I mean, one aspect that I find quite interesting with the, you know, the rise of IoT and all those things, I've literally just come back from from MozFest in London, and I was part of a session about voice assisted, you know, AI assisted kind of systems. And the kind of interesting aspect there that I kind of brought to the session was that there is a lot of overlap. I mean, a lot of the new problems that many people see about how can I control things with voice, and, you know, how can a smart AI assisted kind of assistant convey information back to me just through voice. For somebody who's actually worked in the accessibility field, you know, this is all nothing new. There's a lot of overlap of, you know, things like Zoom text. How do I control my browser for, you know, accessing information, and, you know, screen readers in terms of how information is presented back. So it's kind of an interesting situation that we often find where developers that maybe 10 years ago would have said, oh, accessibility, it's not really my bag, I don't really care about it. All of a sudden, they're rediscovering these kinds of things that we've been talking about for years. Like, if I don't have a screen, how can I still convey information? And, you know, there's potential now to kind of bring our wealth of expertise into those areas as well, because a lot of the topics, one way or another, we've touched on in our work so far. So I think there's sort of a renaissance at the moment of, you know, it's actually cool again to talk about accessibility because it's now affecting you know, users outside of the traditionally, you know, or it's a user with a disability kind of market. So, you know, as much as I like to be sarcastic about, oh, now it's interesting now because it affects you, you know, let's take it as a positive, and there's a lot that can now be kind of moved forward for all users, regardless of ability or disability. Without quoting Tim Berners-Lee's famous "The Power of the Web," I'll stop there now.
But I think that was a really brilliant comment, though, Patrick, because one thing I would be interesting in, if you and Leona, are you seeing innovations coming from, I know my wonderful country, the US, I know we're still very focused on the compliance, legislation, and litigation questions. We are seeing some innovations, but compliance and I'm going to sue you is in your face. It's just the reality of it. Are you seeing some countries that seem to be more interested in the innovations and how accessibility really adds value to the innovation when it comes to ICT design? Or are we not there yet?
I think that's actually more about the people, the nations. I think it tends to be organizations that get very focused on, you know, are we going to get sued? Do we need to be compliant? Whereas what I'm seeing now across, you know, the United States, the UK, the rest of Europe, Asia, Australasia and beyond, is actually developers and designers getting quite excited about accessibility now. You know, so we're seeing a lot of people working in the kind of neural networking, deep mind sort of projects, getting really interested in what we can do to use that technology to improve the quality of synthetic speech, which, as Patrick mentioned, now has huge mainstream application, but it's also got accessibility application. We're talking about things like augmented reality, virtual reality, web VR, all of these things, backed up by kind of AI and other technologies that we can bring together. Haptic feedback, all these different things, they're kind of coming together. And I think accessibility is kind of mixed up in that swirl, but there's a general excitement across kind of innovators and developers and designers that's, making quite a difference now.
I think that where you can get the technologists excited is that accessibility can give them a real use case, a real life use case for some of their toys. So I half joke that accessibility people always get to play with the toys first, but it's certainly the case that we can give them concrete use cases for AR and for haptics and for a whole bunch of other things that maybe they were struggling to find a use case or a user base that they could on. So I do think it's, we're here, we're brilliant beta testers. We tend to put up with the quirks because they enable us to do stuff. So I would always sell accessibility as a concept, as an innovation trigger, because people can try these new technologies, and the accessibility and disability community is always very open to trying new stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the very telling factors in all of this, certainly from our point of view at TPG, is if we go back maybe 5 years, almost all of us who regularly go out to events, we're spending our time at accessibility focused events. Now it's almost completely the reverse. We do still take part in some accessibility focused events, ID24 to some extent, CSUN for example, but actually most of us now spend most of our time talking at what you might call mainstream events. And I think that's one of the biggest sea changes that we're seeing, is that actually, mainstream developer, designer, UX conferences now pretty routinely have an element of accessibility factored into them, and that's helping generate the kind of innovation and creativity too, I think.
Yeah, and also large companies are finally, over the last few years, really kind of putting effort into it. I mean, if we look at the resources that are now available from companies like Google, Microsoft as well, have done excellent work in terms of documenting these things, and it's nice to see finally kind of the as you say, the mainstream acceptance. It's not purely we'll build something and then at the 11th hour we'll consider how does this work for screen reader users, as the classic example. So yeah, I mean there's still a long way to go, but it's there is mainstream recognition of A, the problems, and also B, the advantages that thinking about these sorts of things, not purely for compliance, but as these are use cases, can benefit products. I mean, things like examples. Once the examples become tangible to the developers, that's really where you see things. Thinking, for instance, when Siri first came out, and you could have Siri read you your email or your web pages. All of a sudden, developers that never thought about, I don't need to make my site screen reader, to work with a screen reader. All of a sudden, they were scrambling to, they finally realized what the problem was, and scrambling to find solutions where then the accessibility community can come in and say, well, they're actually welcome. This is the problem we've been talking to you about for the last 10 years. So, hopefully things are getting better. Absolutely, it's getting more mainstream acceptance. Is not seen as a specialist area that will then hand off to a few experts who will then just magically take what we've done so far and make it better, but something that gets considered right at the early stages of design and ideation.
Yeah.
Go on, Léonie.
I was going to agree with Patrick and just add, I think we're finally getting rid of this myth that there is some secret sauce to accessibility, and actually getting people invested in the idea that actually, it's something that we all can do, and in fact all should do. And I think that's a good thing too.
I still remember in my around 2000 when I was working for a telecom in Portugal, and we had users with mobile phones, and the phones have to be replaced, and and suddenly they were. I remember a blind user telling me, "Oh, if my phone is going to be replaced, I have to buy a new license to be able to use that software." And how scared the person was. He was basically his world was just, at the break of ending in the moment when I told you that we're going to replace your phone. So and then we had, okay, what can we do here not to replace the phone and to keep the phone working? Because from a perspective of a relationship between a company and the consumer, that was the obvious thing, just to replace the phone. And that was the best solution at that time, because sometimes it will be better than a repair, and we had to talk with the engineers to find a way not to replace the phone but to keep the phone repaired. So I think we went through a very interesting journey over the last couple of years, and technology, like Patrick was saying about with Siri, we're completely able to change the way our things are available. So we're having some very interesting developments for the better.
We've certainly seen that with the iPhone, where the hardware buttons break and you turn on the accessibility features because you don't want to pay for a new iPhone. So, yeah, or not until they release a new one anyway.
Well, that's it. They give you the excuse at the end. It's like, the home button's not working, I need the new one. But it's also probably interesting to see how a lot of the accessibility technology is now coming, as standard as part of the operating system. And well, of course, TPG / VFO, obviously VFO has a vested interest in terms of the the commercial products like JAWS, but even for us, it's heartening to see, for instance, Narrator that comes with Windows finally. I mean, Windows was one of the last operating systems that didn't have a good solution for a screen reader solution to come right out of the box, and now Narrator's been going from strength to strength, and it's becoming a really viable tool for most use cases. Of course, there's always still a space for commercial software to kind of go further, but purely from a availability of assistive technology, it's really great to see now that we have this ecosystem that isn't completely separate, that just comes as standard in Android with TalkBack, and iOS with VoiceOver, and macOS as well. Some products are better than others, but at least it's not something special now that needs to be installed everywhere, or you have to buy expensive licenses to get at least the the basic out of the box experience. So it's slowly getting there, which is really good to see.
I think that choice is absolutely critical. When I lost my sight in 2000, the choice was Windows and JAWS, Window Eyes, or Supernova, I think, and that was it. There was no concept of a screen reader at all on Apple platforms, at that time, on Mac OS. I did try Linux, I think, for a while, but the solutions there were too painfully technical for me to wrap my head around at the time, and
like Linux in general.
Right. And this is obviously, in the days before we had the touch screen, mobile device explosion that we've got now. But it's fantastic that I think a blind person or a partially sighted person now can actually choose the platform they want and not make that choice based on what availability of assistive technology there is. I think, Zoom is kind of close to that in terms of screen readers. I'm not quite sure that speech recognition is as well supported across platform to enable that, and I don't know if Neil, you might have some thoughts on that. But if we can see that catch up, I think we'll be looking dangerously close to choice for the right technology for the right reasons, not just for the accessibility reasons.
Yeah, I think that the speech interfaces and particularly Siri, that there isn't the same level of deep integration that you have with VoiceOver. not a problem for me because I've still got use of my hands, although carpal tunnel and shoulder impingement means that it still hurts. But for people with very limited mobility, then that would be really useful. I think that actually it will. I think it will come. I think, but I think some of that is down to the who owns what technology and licensing fees and everything else, as much as whether or not it's possible, because we know it's possible already, and there's a lot that could be implemented. And I think that actually possibly that's an area where Google will actually beat Apple. I think that Google Assistant and even Cortana potentially have greater capabilities than Siri right now, although Siri has the best jokes and can tell you where the bodies are buried, apparently.
There's another side that I would like to make is, we are talking about also in the area of inclusion, and the fact that those devices are today available at a cheaper price allow the fact that children and families can have to provide devices like this to their kids, and to allow them to have more active way on how they discover knowledge and engage with their peers.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad just got an iPhone for the first time, and just simple things like password management for people who are older and for people like me who have virtually no working memory are a real problem. So biometric authentication and a password safe can save hours and hours of time and an awful lot of heartache. So getting that kind of stuff set up, it's something that people wouldn't necessarily think of as an accessibility feature, but it is of huge benefit. And so I think that for me it's an accessibility feature. For other people it's just a convenience.
But it's like designing for human beings in general. Yes. I mean, I live using one password, and I could not remember any passwords. I barely remember the master password for this. But yeah, that's kind of the thinking shift as well. It ties all the way back to the inclusive design principles. It's like, as we've always been saying in the community, it's not that we're demanding that things get designed separately and differently for certain user groups, but that there are advantages to considering people and their varying needs, situational needs, or personal needs, and that it will make the world a better place. And that's what we're hopefully seeing. Utopia is coming.
Oh, I'm with you on utopia. I do actually foolishly believe that we can make the world a better place, and I'm still striving to do so. Otherwise, I wouldn't get up in the morning.
Yep, I'm with you on that one.
So
I think our entire industry, well, I think our entire industry is with you on that one, because I'm blessed, like all of you, to be able to travel all over the world, but the people that I'm traveling to meet generally are like us. They really want to make the world a different place, and so a better place for all of us. And we all understand that disability is part of the human experience. It doesn't mean we're broken. And so design so that we all can participate. So it's I think progress is being made, and I really applaud the efforts that you are making here and the principles you've created. And I think this is how we change the world. So I really, really appreciate the work that you are doing.
Thank you.
Excellent. So I think we're pretty much at the end of our half hour. It's gone rather too quickly. It's been fun talking with you. We'll look forward to a really good discussion on Twitter tomorrow night. So just to plug once again, so it's inclusivedesign24.org. It's give us the dates again. 16th of November.
Thursday, the 16th of November.
Yes. He says, desperately scrabbling for his diary since he's taking part. It is in there. You'll be pleased to know. Yes, and it's being supported by Barclays, who also happen to support us. So we're very pleased that they're doing such good work in this space. It's really nice to see large corporations really giving back to the community.
Absolutely.
So thank you to Barclays Access and team. Thank you very much to Léonie and Patrick from TPG. It's been great. And let's remember the hashtag is ID24 on Twitter. Brilliant. Thank you once again.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.